On the 25th of March. We just have an apology from the Deputy Mayor, Big Red Shepherd. He will be here a bit later this morning. But without further ado, I think we will crack into the first briefing paper, which is Asset Management Maturity Policy. We have Tim, Murray and Catherine up the front here to take us over this, so I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks Lydia. Morning councillors and welcome to our briefing on asset management maturity. Today I've got Murray, who you know well, and we have Catherine Hill, who is our asset management lead, who are going to step you through the briefing shortly. Before I hand over to the team, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context in this space. Asset management can be a bit technical at times, but really it's just about taking care of the things our community depend on every day. With asset management, we've certainly been through a journey and come a long way as an organisation. Through a lot of change, a lot of growth, we've continued to strengthen how we plan, manage and invest in our infrastructure. We're more structured, we're more consistent and future focused than we have been in the past. However, at the same time, the maturity assessment and policy review has identified several areas where we need to lift our game. And that's quite normal for a fast growing organisation, but the value of the work that the team has done is you can clearly see the gaps and we can focus our effort where it's going to make the biggest difference. We're not starting from scratch here either. We already have strong foundations, good people, and we're putting in place the right frameworks. Now it's about aligning our approach, confirming the level of practice we need, and updating our policy so we can sharpen our focus and keep getting better. With that in mind, I'll hand over to the team. They'll take you through the assessment, the policy review, and the insights that are going to guide our priorities heading into the 27-37 long-term plan.
Thank you, Tim. So I appreciate that it's quite a big topic to talk about within a half-hour window, and your briefing had a large report and sizable attachments. So just to break that down, what we're here to talk about today is the AM policy review, the asset management policy review that we've undertaken to look to confirm the appropriate AM target levels, which fit within that asset management policy, and to note the maturity assessment that we've undertaken and the work that we'll be doing moving into the improvement plan process. The why and why now, this is a really crucial part of our program as we move towards the long-term plan 2027. Over the next 14 months, the asset management team will be doing a big piece of work around developing their asset management plans alongside the sizable work that the organisation and yourselves will be doing leading into that.
So today I've been trusted with one slide, and one slide only, which is this slide. Yeah, thank you. Bit of AI work there. So I thought I'll start with a quote that I heard on One News a number of weeks ago, and it makes reference to the New Zealand infrastructure strategy. And the quote goes like this: 99% of the infrastructure we need in 30 years already exists. So I'll let that sink in for a minute. 99% of the infrastructure we need in 30 years is already in existence. We have it. Now we're one of New Zealand's fastest growing districts and arguably the fastest at the moment. And we need to plan for new infrastructure to meet the future demands of a growing community, and our team is doing this. However, as the quote alludes, there also needs to be a significant focus on funding of the assets we already have. You may have heard the term sweating the asset. This really means delaying critical renewals to save money today with the real risk of more money tomorrow. The image of the Jenga blocks represents the many aspects of asset management, and we'll be talking about those today. If one block is missing, the tower remains stable. But as we pull out additional blocks, these could, which could be underinvestment in assets, people, processes, the tower starts to become unstable. So this briefing provides Council with an overview of our asset management policy review, which is critical to ensuring that the tower remains upright and standing. So I'm going to hand back to Catherine, who's going to lead us through the substantial part of this presentation.
Thank you, Murray. So as I say, we're talking about three chunks of work today. So the asset management policy is the core piece of the work that we're talking about. This is a document that guides our organisational practice, including the development of our asset management plans. It's aligned to the Gospel of Asset Management, which is the International Infrastructure Management Manual. We review our AM policy on a 3-year cycle, leading into the long-term plan, ensuring that we are starting the asset management plans and long-term plan cycle on the most up-to-date information and organisational direction for asset management. As I mentioned, we have a very busy upcoming 14 months in infrastructure and property as we develop these asset management plans along with the rest of the organisation. So this work has been done now to ensure that we remain focused and on target for that work. As part of the review of the asset management policy, we've been looking at the appropriate levels of asset management practice for each of our activity groups. So that's within the first box on this diagram. And we've also measured our current maturity to inform the development of our improvement plans that we'll see going into the 2027 asset management plans. So this really starts on the left with asking the question of where should we be? What is it that we are targeting in asset management? We move into the policy, which is that confirmation of where we should be and a little bit more, which we'll talk about shortly. And then closing through into where are we now? So that, as I say, we can then inform our improvement planning. So we'll be talking through each of these 3 areas today. Just want to note the history of this. As I say, we undertake reviews of our asset management policy every 3 years, and we've been doing that since 2008. The first asset management plans were developed in 2006, and they're also done on a 3-yearly cycle, and those include improvement plans that are reviewed every 3 years. We have been doing various maturity assessments within that period, within individual activities, but moving forward, as part of our maturity improvements across the organisation, we're bringing in a consistent approach to that within the infrastructure activities, so that we're measuring all of the activities in the same way, consistently, and ongoing monitoring and review of that, so we can continue to monitor how we're maturing and keep up to date with that. So the first stage is assessing the appropriate AM practice. And as I mentioned before, this is asking where should we be, and allowing us to ensure that we have the just right management of community infrastructure assets to ensure, as Murray has mentioned, that our Jenga block tower stays upright. We've undertaken a detailed assessment following the methodology that was used under the last review in 2023. That's outlined in Appendix C to your briefing. I'm happy to talk through that methodology in greater detail, but I note that there were essentially 3 stages consistent with the previous assessment. The first is a crude assessment that runs on population. So that identifies, apologies, I believe I have another slide, so I'll pause that and come to that in a moment. Under our national and international guidance, we have 5 levels of asset management maturity available to us, running from aware through to advanced. Each level is building on the one before it. The maturity that we can look at achieving comes with differing levels of cost, resource requirements and risk. Due to the importance of the infrastructure that Council manages on behalf of its communities, Council's position has been that aware and basic are inappropriate levels of asset management for this organisation. So we begin at the level of core, and we have the option of looking through our activities, what is appropriately managed at core, intermediate and advanced as appropriate. As I began to mention, we've undertaken this assessment on a 3-stage process, each one refining through into a greater level of assessment. So the initial was a population screening using the district population and township population estimates for this year. This is a very crude assessment tool, which allows us to correlate indicative population with a potential asset management level. So when we look at the whole population level for Selwyn District, as with Rolleston and Lincoln, those are indicating intermediate level maturity, with the remaining townships being at a core. But we know that our assets are not distributed in the same way that our people are. So we need to have a little bit more scrutiny of that to ensure that the appropriate management is in place for those assets servicing our community. The second level looks at the riskscape and cross-activity factors. And this was really looking at what has changed since the 2003 assessment, updating to the current operating environment. This again gave us an indication of core to intermediate. These two levels are more appropriately guiding our cross-activity asset management practice, so the likes of the asset management policy, infrastructure strategy, and our strategic asset management plan. We then needed to look at individual activities. So transportation is obviously quite different to our resource and recovery activity. So the third stage went down into those activity level considerations to recommend minimum appropriate levels of asset management practice. The recommendation from that report is summarised on the right-hand side in the blue table, and we've populated the previous assessment and minimum levels that are currently set under the AM policy on the left. The notable change here is the change to activities. So previously, waters were collated at a whole level, a 5 waters level, which was set at an intermediate practice level. With the transfer of water and wastewater to Selwyn Water, we've now split those activities out into the remaining 3 surface waters. That has allowed us to focus the required level into stormwater, which is part of the local water done well framework and therefore expected to have greater regulatory requirements, holding it at the intermediate level, but allowing us to refocus water races and land drainage to a core activity. The other notable change here is the separation of open spaces and facilities, previously managed as one activity, recognising the organisational change in that and the size of those portfolios. That's been separated out. So moving from a combined previous of core to open spaces being core, facilities being core plus, as we refer to it, where the majority of the activity will be undertaken at a core asset management level, but we recognise that the critical assets within that portfolio require additional focus. So those will be looked to be managed at an intermediate maturity level. That then brought us to the AM policy. So this allows the organisation to articulate a clear commitment to asset management and outline the expectations. So as I say, it's confirming where should we be. Just to position the asset management policy, I'm sure you've seen many diagrams like this. They can be as complex and as detailed as you want them to be. I would refer to this as a simplified, but I know not everyone would agree with that. So the asset management policy sits under Council's strategic direction. It's informed by all of the other pieces of strategic direction Council undertake, Future Selwyn and other such things. It guides our infrastructure planning. So it will flow through into the strategic asset management plan, which is a new document being introduced this cycle, and down into our infrastructure strategy and across our asset management plans. It will also help inform the water services strategy and coordinated work, and importantly connects into the long-term plan, and that is the alignment of why we're doing this work now, to work towards the LTP 2027. The asset management policy looks a bit different to the previous policy, which is in Appendix A, draft policy, and Appendix B of your briefing. Initially it was to align with the template that Council have for policies, so those look a little different now, which gave us more scope to work within the principles of the policy. We've also broadened out from what was a more focused statement on asset management level to being a broader policy that sets the direction for asset management practice. That's allowed us to introduce a table of asset management responsibilities, which clearly articulates from Council through executive and down into our delivery teams, their responsibilities under this policy. We've separated the activities, as I mentioned, and we've introduced the strategic asset management plan, which will be a new document coming in through the 2027 long-term plan, which will give that strategic oversight to our asset management plans and ensure cross-activity planning. We've also updated based on the 2026 context, so I don't need to tell anyone in this room how much has changed and how quickly things have changed since 2023. So we've informed our review along those lines and updated with new guidance, international guidance for asset management. And then the third part of it, the where are we now? So we know where we want to be, and we've had that measure for a while of where our activities should be. But now we want to ask the question of where are we now, and what do we need to do to undertake that gap analysis and start to close those gaps through our improvement planning. So it's quite a process that we've run to work through this, but we've used a tool, the Asset Management Maturity Assessment Tool, or AMAT tool, developed by Treasury New Zealand, that goes through a number of components underpinning asset management aligned with international best practice. We worked through internal process of self-administering that scoring with the principal planner and asset managers, and then we had an external review of each of the activities by Mark Gordon of IAM Consulting. Through that, we held moderated sessions. These are quite subjective assessments, and so we expect that everyone involved in it will have a slightly different view depending on their own experience and their own exposure to this. So we have moderated views where everyone has that opportunity to share their scoring, respective scoring and justifications, and we come to an agreed score. We also ensure that there is appropriate alignment across the activities within infrastructure and property. That process has given us three things. So the activity score, which is the whole of activity, so transportation, a whole of activity, open spaces, whole of activity score. Those are the scores that we look at when we compare it to the minimum appropriate level of asset management practice that the AM policy sets. We also have scores down to the component level within each activity. So each activity is assessed against 16 components, where you get scores and relative targets that we set for those. So while we're saying that an activity such as transport is targeting an intermediate level, we can look at each of those 16 components and say, we want to pull some levers. Actually, we think resilience, matters around resilience has got a greater importance, and we can set a higher score that we want to target there. The piece of work that's now underway is in the middle and moving across to the right. So within those scores, we then undertake a gap analysis. So where are we scoring at an activity compared to the minimum level set in our policy? And what are our scores for each of those components compared to the targets that we believe we should be at? We will then work through identifying those improvement actions that will help us to close those gaps. Those will be prioritised and scheduled into the asset management plan. So you'll see that detail later in the year as we work through the development of the asset management plan. As I mentioned, part of the process has been embedding a cross-activity process for measuring maturity, and that will be implemented, which will have more regular review and reporting back to council on an annual basis, so that we can continue to have that oversight of where are we relative to the levels that we're asking council to confirm for our asset management practice, and are we tracking against those improvements. This is just to help intro the next slide and the asset management assessment in your appendix, Appendix E, which has a lot of detailed graphs. But effectively, asset activity score, as I mentioned, is the dashboard view that gives us the whole of activity, where we're scoring compared to where we should be. But on the next graph, it is the horizontal shaded band that you'll be interested in. That is setting our whole of activity target, so our core, our intermediate, wherever that might be. The component scores are the line graph. So this is where we believe we are currently scoring our activities across each of those 16 components, and then the bar graph recognises those targets for each of those 16 components. So if we look at open spaces as an example that we've included for this presentation, that line is showing where we are scoring relative to the blue horizontal banding of core. So this activity should be managed at a core level. As you can see, there are some elements where we have increased the component target, where we believe that it is appropriate to have additional focus on some components within open spaces management. The line shows that there are some things there that we are achieving well. There are other areas that we know that we're not achieving the level that we have set in the asset management policy, and those are the areas that we'll be particularly targeting in terms of those improvement actions. So the likes of for open spaces, you can see there that the line is lower in asset data, asset information systems, and asset management process management. So this is the gap analysis that we'll then be doing as we work through into our improvement planning. At a whole of activity view, this allows us to see across our infrastructure portfolios how we are scoring. So this is the whole activity, which is the summation of those component scores for each. The coloured bands are the targets based on the draft policy and the recommended minimum appropriate levels of asset management practice for each area, with the speedo dial indicating where we are. So again, you can see that we are largely falling within the areas we should be, but we would typically consider achievement of each level to be at the upper end of that band. So it also highlights that we have quite a few opportunities there for that improvement planning to try and close those gaps and mature each of those practice areas. In terms of next steps, we'll be looking to bring this back to Council on the 15th of April and be seeking your adoption of the asset management policy, which will give that guidance to staff as we work through the development of the infrastructure strategy, the strategic asset management plan, and the AMPs as part of the long-term plan. I appreciate this is a lot of information. As I say, your briefing packs are pretty full with that as well. So really appreciate any feedback or any questions you may have, and we're happy to take those offline as well as we work to ready ourselves for the 15th of April for you. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I note that, yes, there's a lot of information in our briefing pack, but that is great because it gives us time to look at it, to read it, and then to ask any questions that we have here. And I think the thing that always sits with me around policy, and I recognise this is a huge step forward for us. We recognise that we needed to step forward into this space, and so I'm grateful of the work that has been done to put us into this position to start forming our asset management plans for the LTP. So grateful in that space. I think the thing I always think about with policy is, can we implement this? Is it actually achievable for us? And, you know, like the question kind of came to me around the water races and land drainage and stepping into that core practice. Is that because we're going to be more realistic about what we can deliver on through our asset management plans, or is that just actually a byproduct of separating out all the waters? And I really like that you've separated out the functions of council as well, rather than keeping them in groups. I think that that's a really good move. That is my first question.
Yeah, so I think it provides a realistic a level that we should be aiming for based on the value of the asset, the criticality of it, all of those things. And it's also something that's reasonably achievable, or appropriately achievable, I should say. If these scores were to go up, well, then there's a discussion about resourcing and budgets to achieve that high level.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Sorry, and I would just add, it may look as though we are intending to drop the practice level, but as Murray said, it is realistic. I think the reason that Five Waters was at that intermediate level before was really driven by the water and wastewater. Those other activities weren't having that same level of investment, and so this is more realistically showing that at an activity level.
Cool. I think that's a really good move, pulling everything out separately. It gives us a really clear direction in that space. And the other thing is that the monitoring of this and of this policy, is that just going to be through maturity assessments? Because I think about how do we as council regularly see whether we're meeting those targets through the asset management standards. What does this look like in practice for us and the monitoring for it?
So I'm going to start and I'm going to quickly hand over to Catherine. So Catherine started with us in December, as I mentioned at the start, and has done a tremendous amount of high quality work. And this is only some of it, but she's also been doing some work on how we report to council and provide the regular feedback. So I shall ask Catherine to talk to that briefly.
Thank you. As Murray says, this is a piece of work that's underway at the moment, so it is still very much in draft. But part of the next step is looking at how are we monitoring that. So asset management maturity assessments will continue to be a core component of that. So we're intending to do substantial reviews on a 3-yearly basis as we prepare our asset management plans. But we would also be looking, as part of the ongoing review of our improvement plans, to look at those on an annual basis. So when I talked about coming back to council on an annual basis to update, that would be with this is what's changed in that maturity scope. It will be a lighter assessment. We also have other things like our asset management plans are all externally peer reviewed after they're adopted and in that drafting period. So we have those reviews that allow us to inform our improvements going into the next cycle of asset management plans. There are a number of tools like that we'll be relying on, and that will all be rolled up along with any other reporting that you have around deliverability of projects and those kind of things.
Great. Sounds like you've got all that in hand, so that's gives me quite a level of comfort of the way that we're moving forward. Go to councillors, and so first up I have Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you for that. It was really enjoyable to see that we've gone to that level of detail, so thank you for that report. I mean, you know, at a 385-page agenda, won't thank you for that part. Hey, so I've got a few questions here. So you've put down land drainage as core. You've mentioned just in reply to Lydia's stuff that that's because we've separated water and wastewater away from that. And so that's sort of knocked the land drainage and the stormwater back into something of less requirement and less spend. We have an issue at the moment where our communities are facing an underspend in those areas, which we now have probably a considerable amount of spend required to bring it back up to where it should be. So there's a few questions that I've derived which have probably come from that issue. So stormwater feeds into the water races. So is there an overlap that we need to identify to ensure that the correct process enacted and we're avoiding silos, because I see them as a marriage, stormwater and land drainage?
Yeah, so we certainly see them as integrated, and I suppose that leads back to the One Water strategy that was developed a number of years ago, showing that water is actually the same water, just in different states and different times. You know, it's rainfall in the foothills into our lowland streams. It's into our water races, which leak into the ground. It's coming up through our drinking water supplies. We drink it into our wastewater supplies, discharged back to ground, coming up in our land drainage network into our stormwater networks, and back to the lake. Repeat. So it is all one water. So we agree with that.
Okay. So the way that this is put here, it's identified them as separate individual, but you're saying that even though that the policy and the way that people are going to be working through the SAMP, they still will be looking at this as a co-joined exercise.
Correct.
Cool. On page 19, you've got here about the asset managers, and so it says deliver a level of service to an agreed acceptable risk, which is for the head of asset management. Who determines what that acceptable level of risk is? Is it the asset management, or is it going to be council?
Well, at the head of each LTP period, councillors will work out the level of service they want to provide to the community. So councillors speak into that setting of those levels of service, and then it's our job to ensure we meet those.
Okay. Under the strategy for this work, will there be clear staged approaches to the work that's ongoing over the next number of years that will be shared with the councillors and the public?
Yeah, so using land drainage and stormwater as an example, we're currently working through master plans at the moment, and those will be brought back to council once they're completed. So that's looking at what improvements we need to do to provide protection against flooding of habitable floor levels, for example, water quality improvements, those sort of things. So those master plans will come through to council, hear the long-term plan, and that builds up those budgets and full works programs.
Thank you. Are there areas that we need to bring in outside evaluation for a detailed audit on the areas that require greater improvement, and will council be notified of this?
So the process we followed provides that certainty to council, so I don't believe so, no.
Page 38, you've got down land drainage as core. Is it not currently a higher risk than what's been identified here?
Yeah, so this is in terms of asset management maturity. So if we just sort of compare it with drinking water, for example, so the quality of as-builting, you want your water supply mapped to an accuracy of maybe 200 mils, for example, but for land drainage, you don't need that accuracy across the whole network. So it's those sort of each individual asset management type things, we do detailed hydraulic modelling of water supplies, pressure monitoring, all of those sort of things, but that same level is not required for land drainage. It's still as important, don't get me wrong, but we don't have people drinking the land drainage and potentially having those ill effects.
Okay, thank you. Page 15, governance and operations. I just wanted to know, so I'm just going to pull that up, page 15. So we've got operations. I just wanted to know what currently the head of the operations, which is Gareth, out of that bottom line under operations, what things is he overseeing at the moment?
Gareth primarily oversees maintenance works, as opposed to what Murray is looking at, which is planning and policy.
Right. So, I mean, I guess you've got transport facilities, open spaces, stormwater, water races, land drainage, resource and recovery and waste. I guess my question is, do we have enough people with the oversight of those individually, rather than them being multiple things lumped under for one person, and so that we end up where any numbers of staff members might have too many things that they have to have the oversight of? And is that an area which we need to explore or are exploring?
So just going back to the first part of the question, there's integration between asset management and operations. So we co-develop the operational budgets, for example. So asset managers is the pen holder, so we document that and plot it all out and predict for growth and all those sort of things, but we work tightly with the operations team. Some of the integrations would be like with the Cord contract. So when Cord goes out and historically fix the water main, they click and that goes into the asset management system. There's been a break in this pipe and we collect that data, which then we can predict, failure rates, etc. So that's the integration with the operations team. It is the structure does allow for that resilience as well, because Gareth and his operations team understands the assets, and so does the asset management team under myself. And so there is a crossover there. If someone's sick or leave, all those sort of things, there can be a cross-pollination, if you like.
Right. Thank you.
I think it's, in my view, I think it's really important to look at this and, this is my view on life, right? That this policy informs the AMPs, which informs the budgets, which informs project prioritisation through the long-term plan, setting our expectations there and shapes our future spending decisions. So, I think this is when, I asked if the policy is great. The telling point for us will be the implementation and everything that falls out of this policy, because at the end of the day this will inform our LTP, which is our investment, and that is where we consider the level of investment that we put into the asset management plans and stuff. So it's not necessarily sitting with one person, it's multiple across the organisation when you look at an asset management plan, and out of that falls out the investment and capital and maintenance and all of the things. So this, is sort of the top star for asset management, the guiding star for it. Denise.
Hi, thanks, Catherine. Amazing presentation. I wish I could have all those words that you use. So I know that this is policy, and Lydia's questions, there seems to be some reassurance that there will be monitoring of it. But could you give us a real life example in plain English of one of our assets and what this will actually mean? For example, say Lincoln Events Centre. And also if we're sending Cord, how do we know that what we are asking is being done? Is there monitoring of that? That might be a question for Tim, maybe. Not sure.
So I can talk to the asset management side of it first. So our team under Ronwyn, who's the asset manager for facilities, has been through all of our buildings, all of our facilities, doing a detailed condition assessment and generating a 30-year work program from that. So there's a lot of detail about checking roofs and spoutings and paint coatings and you name it, everything there. So there's a detailed work program that's been generated for this next long-term plan process. So then in terms of how that information is collected, so in this case it's a different contractor than Core that does the facilities management type work, but they collect the information and send it back through the operations team who signs off on their works orders and collates that information for us. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, sorry. Is that close?
Does it, Denise? Does that answer your question?
Yes, as long as it's being monitored.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our facilities, we have a total facilities contract that sits with BGIS. So Court aren't involved in our facilities maintenance. And we have people overseeing every other contract and monitoring progress and performance in regard to that.
I think the big thing for us will be the asset management plans that fall out for each of those groups through the long-term plan. That is a key touch point for us to be across what are in those documents and what does that look like for our community. Yeah, Aaron.
Thanks for the presentation. It's great to see the work that's been going into this over the last wee while. Monitoring and reporting sort of been a little bit of a theme that's come up. You mentioned that you expect to do annual reporting to the council. I think maybe at least in the phase that we're going through now, that might not be quite often enough, and perhaps it might be 6 monthly through finance and performance if it's sort of keeping track of our progress, and then there'll be elements of risk which might be appropriate to go to risk management, ordinary risk rather. So maybe in the policy, and actually the thing that's missing in the policy is it mentions monitoring and reporting quite a bit, but it doesn't actually make the connection between staff keeping governance informed formally in the policy. I know you would do it, but it's not formalised in the policy.
So as I mentioned, there's a bit of work underway at the moment, which is that next stage of the improvement planning, and that will have that detail of the monitoring and reporting. Can certainly look at the timeframes and the frequency of some of those reports, but I would note that some of the improvements that will be identified through that process, you're not going to see the improvements straight away, and so the idea behind the annual review of the maturity assessment is to give a bit of an update to how we're tracking. But we may not see that in the first quarter of each year as we implement those items. But we can certainly look as we develop the improvement actions as to what the appropriate reporting might be. The piece of work that I'm talking about has been around developing a SOP that supports this process. So that goes through from how are the improvement items identified, how are we prioritising them against which criteria, how are we recording that and monitoring that, and then those feedback loops through executive and up into council as well. So certainly can take that feedback on board.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it is more the improvement actions that I would expect to see things happening, right? Not necessarily immediately the state of things is magically better, but we can see the path that we're on, if you like. So yeah, thanks.
Cool. Brace.
I wrote a page on this. A lot of information, and I probably am a little bit different than the rest of the table. Catherine, you've been here 12 months, so this is, I've taken a different line from what I wrote. When you came in, what was your feeling on what you found with this policy and the information that was gathered over the time from 2006, 2008?
So I haven't made 12 months, it was December last year.
Oh,
so
even better.
and far fewer months. I should also acknowledge that I was part of the team externally, previously working as an asset management consultant, supporting council. So I was involved in the last assessment and policy as well. I will own that this is a significant improvement to the work that we were doing at that time. I see that there are many things that Selwyn does very well, particularly around the rapid response to growth. But this is about identifying those things that we can do better. So we know, as you can see from the maturity assessments that we've undertaken, there are things like data and some of our processes. It's not to say we don't have processes for how we manage things, but it might be that they live with a person. So if they're not written down and they're not testable and repeatable, then we can't say that that is a mature component. So this is really around recognising that where we are now and focusing on those improvements going forward. And there will be a number of them that we can make. Some of them will be quick wins, others will be longer term maturity improvements.
Thank you. I guess I read this and got a feeling that we were at Aware on previous to this point, and your gap analysis when you came in and saw what this is. We're now looking at the IIM 2020 format to work to. I got a feeling that the dial gauges were all a little bit, from the information that we had, where I'm getting to, and probably the question is, the gap analysis, what sort of time frame will we, when we implement this in April, with the gap analysis, the SOPs that need to be written and the data that needs to be collected in those gaps, how useful is this going to be for us in the LTP? How much information do you believe, and what sort of upgrade will this be from where we were? Because within 12 months, I get a feeling, without putting words in your mouth, that there won't be a long enough time frame to get meaningful improvement.
So I would say that this is a continual process. So I'm not going to come back in 12 months' time and say, congratulations, guys, we've hit everything we need to be doing. There will always be those improvements we can be making. I would say that we haven't suddenly made significant improvement to get to this point. As I've talked about, Council have been undertaking asset management plans and improvement planning since 2006, when asset management plans were introduced to local government. We've had the AM policy guiding us since 2008. So a lot of that maturity is long-term maturity. It's things that we've already got in place. What we're doing now is just putting a bit more structure around that, so we can more confidently say, comparing all of our activities across the board, this is where we sit and these are the improvements we need to make. But certainly a lot of the things that have been assessed that contribute to the scoring that's presented today, those aren't new. Those have been in play for quite a while. So I would say that those activities have probably been at the core and into some of the intermediate levels in previous assessments, but we haven't had that view across all of the activities in a consistent way before.
So policies can be dusty. They can sit on people's desks, and that has been, it's great that that's been identified, and that it's great that we're going forward and putting a little bit more into it. What adoption info will be gathered? Who is going to be held accountable for this in this new policy? Where will this sit? Who will be the person that actually runs and drives this data collection, the updates, the action points? I'm more interested in the operational than what we've been presented here today, because there is a lot of information at that high level, but how it's implemented, and even just going, as Madam Mayor said, it's a great overview of this, but actually implementing that policy and those things. Who's going to own this?
Yes, I get to have that pleasure. That is me. But, you know, it's actually also all of us, because if we're not funded, we don't have the resources, then it all falls down. So asset management is actually organisational wide. It includes the governance, includes the executive, it includes the staff. But in terms of this policy, I take ownership of that and making sure it's implemented.
It's been out. Yep. Okay. No, I think that's...
I think, Reece, it's still that same flow-on effect of this policy, and then all the actions that fall out of it, and then at the end of the day, we approve work programs and budgets that are associated to asset management. So, some of it sits on us. If we don't fund the program that has been asked for, then work can't be completed on some of it, and so that's I guess a level of risk that us as a governance team need to be considering when we look at asset management plans too. No pressure, eh? Tracy.
Thank you. I concur with Reece's comments. This is a great plan, and I've said it when other plans and policies have come. From my perspective, this is great, but implementation. What does it look like? How do we know it's working? How do we know people are now inputting the data into the system that we've given them? How do we know? How do we know? How do we measure? So that we, as the governors, as part of that whole circle, we have the assurance that this policy has become what is actually happening. And the best way to solve a problem is to identify a problem, and that's what this report does. It says to us, where are our problems, our areas for improvement, whatever we want to do it. But the solution to those is monitoring and measuring. And so perhaps as feedback, when you come back to us for the next one, is something as robust as this, but with a focus on how will we know? Because in order for us to give you the resourcing / money, we need the assurance that in 12 months, 24 months, we're not sitting in front of a reviewed policy showing us similar clocks. So that's the quid quo pro of us all being in the same circle. But I do appreciate the work, and because unless we know, we don't know. But I'm also wondering if all of the solutions to some of the problems are actually more money. I accept that there are solutions for which money will be an answer, but I also need reassurance that we've done everything the best way we can before we ask for more people, for more money, for more whatever. So thank you, much appreciated.
Thanks, Tracy. John.
Yes, just going back to the planning stage, whereabouts does the subdivisions, once they're granted, given that we're a fast-growing district, where does that fit into the policy to inform the infrastructure requirements that are likely to be there? Because my thoughts are that we've got the theory, but as soon as the subdivisions come on the board, and particularly the large ones are granted, that provides quite a real-time link in. So how does that inform the policy, please?
Yeah, so in terms of asset management planning, we rely on growth predictions that will come to council as one of the assumptions before we get really cranked into long-term plans. That's a really critical assumption, and it's fraught with difficulty. So I don't envy you as a council, because if you choose a growth prediction that's too high and the growth doesn't happen, well then all of a sudden you're not collecting the rates that you said you would. But we've got some pretty sparkly infrastructure to meet a growth that hasn't happened. If you choose a low growth because we want to make sure we collect enough rates, then we don't plan for infrastructure fast enough, and so finding that balance is really critical. So I suppose it's a long way of saying that one of the key assumptions of these activity management plans build off is those growth predictions, so they'll come past council at some stage to adopt, and that's what we base it off. We look ahead about developments we know, which ones have come on board. There's generally a 2-year window where a developer gets their 2 to 4 signs off, but they maintain those assets for a 2-year period, so we can plot those, and so we know when additional mowing, for example, is going to occur on reserves, or additional whatever it's going to be we need to renew and plan for. So there's a lot of processes in there that we all together, but that key one is that growth predictions, which, as I say, will come to council to determine.
So just to clarify, the growth predictions, where do you draw that data from originally?
Yeah, so that's our strategy team that does that. So it's not the asset management team. That's the input that we receive. So Kath Carter and her team will at some stage bring that to you as part of the LTP preparation.
John, and now looking ahead, we have like 2 hour blocks for LTP planning and strategy, and going through a lot of that information with the strategy team. So it is a really important piece of work for us to do. Sarah.
Thank you, team. Just reiterating, this is a great piece of work and it's really nice to see it coming into fruition, so thank you for that. Questions, and I guess it's sort of following on from a couple of different comments from councillors around land drainage, but I think a wee bit around sort of the baseline data that you've got access to and are using for risk assessments. Sort of more and more aware of some of the risks that, resilience risks that impact on our district that we are not necessarily have complete knowledge of or control of in our district. So, you know, stuff from CCC or land drainage that's controlled by ECAN, where it may impact on our ratepayers' properties through our district. Just wondering sort of whether we take account of that when we look at our risk in this piece of work.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that one. That is tricky. So we obviously have a focus on the assets that we operate and maintain, but we certainly, as an organisation, you know, are in constant communication with Environment Country, looking after the Halls River, for example, Christchurch City Council, who discharges into that network, Taitapu, who happens to be at the bottom of that network and receives all that flow. Management of lake levels, we speak into that in terms of openings and or not. So we have inputs into that, but we can probably control what we can control, and that's probably slightly outside that. In terms of these activity management plans, if there's cross-boundary flows, then our flood models pick up that. So if there's flows from another catchment which comes across into ours, then that's certainly taken into account. But the management of those schemes sit with those individual organisations, whether it be ECAN, Christchurch City Council, or ourselves.
So where there might be, you know, a real change to the risk on our roading network, for example, because of, you know, increase in flooding risk because of development that's happening across borders, is that the type of thing that's of interest in this or able to be taken into account? Yeah,
so no, and that's so the establishment of the asset management team, which is under myself. So all the asset managers report through to me, and we make sure that we are talking not cross-purpose, but we're talking together and collaborating and making sure that we're working as best we can. So the flood model, for example, which was developed by our surface water asset management team, can be used by the transport team to identify those culverts which are under capacity and overtopping, which is work was going underway at the moment.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, team. I know we went a little over time, but I think there's some really thoughtful questions in there and understanding policy and how that's enacted and all the work that falls out the bottom of that. So wish you luck with all of the work that you have to do, but I think that, you know, what this is showing me is that we're taking a good step forward into the planning for the LTP, and I look forward to the rest of the information and the planning and the reporting that will come back to us. So thank you very much. Next up we have community halls engagement. So I will invite Denise Kidd and her team, Hannah, who is leading this, to the table to give us an update on community hall engagement.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Council previously sought an update from staff on the engagement that we were planning with 5 of the council-owned community halls that are relatively lightly used and have scope for greater or different use. This is also an opportunity to draw your attention to the 5 halls that we are intending to engage around. The 5 halls are across both Melbourne and Ellesmere ward. So we have Greendale Hall, Green Park Memorial Hall, Mead Hall, Sheffield Hall and Tawara Memorial Hall. In this engagement, we're keen to reach a meaningful and representative cross-section of the community as well as the associated stakeholders and interest groups. In this engagement, we're keen to that the process encourages and facilitates meaningful engagement. And in this engagement, we really want to encourage a cross-section of the community and stakeholders to express their views. So with me today, we have Hannah and Nicola and Catherine, who've all been part of either planning the engagement and or will be part of implementing the engagement.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. As Denise said, I'm Hannah, and it's my pleasure to present the engagement plan to you this morning. As Denise said, in November last year, we introduced this project to you as part of a deep dive into council activities during councillor induction. At the time, councillors requested that we bring the engagement plan back to you at a briefing so you can hear more about the engagement approach. At that time, some councillors expressed an interest in participating in the engagement activities, and we welcome your involvement in this process, and we ask that councillors who wish to be involved to make themselves known to staff after the presentation. In recent years, council has taken on day-to-day operation of some halls. Like many historic buildings, community halls will require ongoing care and investment, and usage at some halls has been lower than expected. This has indicated that it's time to start a conversation with communities to explore what the futures of these halls may look like, and if there's any alternative ways these halls could be managed and operated so that they can continue to serve their communities well. In the coming months, council will be beginning these conversations about 5 community halls, which Denise alluded to before. Council has made no decisions at this stage, and all options are on the table. The final decision will sit with councillors as part of the upcoming long-term plan process. So taking you through the engagement plan now, Section 2 outlines the goals and purposes of the engagement, what we want to achieve, how we will measure it if we've succeeded. In addition, it identifies key audiences for engagement, including councillor and Malvern Community Board input. We've received some questions about the measures in the engagement plan. One of the measures in the plan is that 90% of identified stakeholders participate in engagement. An identified stakeholder is a person or a group who council has identified as having an interest in the hall. These are a small in number and typically have had a long association with the hall. For example, they would be users of the hall for the last 2 years. A list showing the difference between people and groups who are identified as stakeholders and people who are identified in the local geographic community is on page 83. We will have achieved this measure if 90% of the stakeholders that we have identified and invite to an engagement activity participate. Although not an explicit measure in the engagement plan, staff want to create good quality experiences for the community during engagement activities, which will include asking participants for feedback. In sections 3 and 4 of the plan, you'll find indicative timeframes of the proposed engagement. The engagement timeline has shifted slightly since our last presentation to account for the annual plan consultation timeline and is scheduled after annual plan deliberations are completed. The engagement is planned to start in June and will go through to August this year, with the first stage involving face-to-face conversations with the community, and the second stage a survey to refine key ideas that we hear from the community. We expect to hold engagement activities at a variety of times and days to suit different people's schedules. As councillors, you will make the final decision about what options progress to long-term plan consultation. Section 5 outlines the budget for the project, and in Section 6 you will find the identified risks. Separate assessments will be developed to manage these risks at an operational level, but it is worth you as governors being aware of these risks, in particular risks involving community dissatisfaction, operational strain on staff, and potential reputational impact for council. Section 8 of the plan outlines the proposed engagement activities during this process. For face-to-face engagement activities, the focus will be on facilitating small group type conversations with the community. This will give an opportunity for everyone who attends an event to share their thoughts with staff and acts as a key mitigation for some of the identified risks. And lastly, the appendices to the plan identify the key messages and proposed questions for the engagement. It would be worth familiarising yourselves with the key messages in case you get questions from your communities about this project. There will be a page on Council's website which has information for communities about the halls and the engagement process, where you can direct community members if they have questions. Staff will update that page with frequently asked questions and other information as the engagement progresses. Staff would also be interested in hearing any questions that you receive from communities, as we can inform that information through that. So, as a reminder, councillors who wish to participate in the engagement activities, please can you make yourselves known to either myself or Denise after today's meeting, and we will get in touch with further information about the next steps to prepare for the engagement. Thank you for your time, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Cool. Thank you, Hannah. Well, first off, I want to say great to be able to have this discussion here, and you know, in my view, we're seeking feedback on the engagement method that you've put in front of us, and so for me, it really resonates that engagement needs to be. I just want to highlight that the immediate townships that those halls are in, that is their identity, and so you know that is the top of the list for me for those communities, because yeah, they are their history and their hall, and so I think you know when we're talking about who we're engaging with, I think that is the most important group as the immediate townships. And when we talk about councillors involved, it would be, and this is my expectation, and councillors can take or leave this, but you know, we have our councillors assigned to the portfolio, and so my expectation is that portfolio councillors are involved in this, which is Denise and John, and then the appropriate ward councillor is involved in their hall as well, in their local area, and whether there needs to be support from at large in that space. I think you guys can work that out. But that is my expectation, is that the portfolio councillors are across this as a priority, and the appropriate ward councillors. So happy to hand over to councillors. First up is Elizabeth.
Thank you. I really, really appreciated what you packed into this report and the direction that you took, and it was really reflecting what we've been asking, which is a massively community focused result, and we're going out, we're not telling them what we're giving them, we're really seeking that feedback from them. So thank you so much for this. Really made my day reading it. I was absolutely stoked to see it. So my first question, I've got a few, is I won't mention the number because it's slightly eye-watering, but the amount that we've budgeted for the comms, I'd love it to be not a target. And I think, look, many of us are really interactive with our communities, and I think you probably utilise your councillors there to get the word out and probably save a bit of coin. Secondly, I'd love to know if we could have an additional report on the current status that we've got with some of the way that we operate with other halls. So we've got Lease and Heritage Park, so we own the building and we lease that to them. Just looking at the differences of how we do things. I know the South Springston Soldiers Memorial Hall is another example of where there's a joint arrangement, and if we could have that written to us of how those examples are working and identify the pros and cons, and maybe also get feedback from those guys to help us feed into best direction.
Thank you for that suggestion. We have been considering not just those that in terms of Selwyn, but those across other areas, different models and how they're working. And we thought that might be useful to share with with the meeting itself, so that people see other examples.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Denise. In the report, I'm trying to remember, there was a lot in here, but you've talked about the stakeholder groups and smaller meetings. Is there going to be the town hall meeting where everyone from the public can come? Because I'm going to suggest that that needs to be the icing on the cake for everything else in the report. I think we need to not be scared of that. I think as a council we need to get out there and be brave and actually say everyone's invited to the conversation.
Yeah, so in terms of the town hall meeting, we are planning on running it. It's just running in a slightly different way. So everyone will be invited to it, but it may not look the same as a typical town hall meeting, where it's usually staff up the front presenting to community and then community listening and then asking questions. So what we're looking for is a more collaborative approach where we can actually work with the community and hear from everyone around what they're interested in. There's a couple of benefits of that way. So the primary one for us is that often in those styles of meetings, there's sometimes maybe 3 or 4 people who are the primary voices in that style of meeting. And that has its value, but we're interested in hearing from everyone. So in the smaller group facilitated conversations means that we can actually hear from each different community member.
Sure.
But yes, everyone will be invited to those.
Totally hear what you're saying, and we won't talk about what GCP did, but I will say that portion of what they did over here in the library and the way that they split everyone up into small tables and you put stickers on things and that kind of thing. Yeah, there's definitely ways you can do that really well. Thank you. So on page 96, we've got stakeholder questions. Just wondering if the councillors that Lydia's identified that we can be involved, please, in the questionnaire that will be going out. I presume that's a part of it. We'll give them a piece of paper they can fill out and tick the boxes and write notes. Could we please be involved with the questions there, just because we might have some inside information about the kind of things that we're getting asked by the community to help feedback to you guys?
Yes, absolutely. You guys as community representatives have the best knowledge about your community, so would welcome suggestions around if there is a different question that would better work with the communities.
Cool. Thank you. Denise.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Elizabeth. Love seeing this. It's something that community come to me all the time about, is wanting to run their own halls. Yeah, and it was taken away from them. I just had a question about the rates, actually. Sophie kindly did reply to one of my questions. Apparently, all ratepayers pay $231 a year for community centres, and that goes into a central budget. But I can't see it represented in the financial balance sheets that we've been provided. So I'm not sure where that money goes or how it gets allocated. So that's probably a general question. And a couple of the halls are shown as paying all of them. So do they pay rates? I was just a bit confused. Thanks.
So in terms of, I just want to make sure I've understood your question correctly. So that is correct that the district pays for the halls as a general rate, so it's not localised. In terms of the questions about race specifically, that may need to go to Alison to answer, as we don't have that information for ourselves, or it potentially may need to come back to you because I'm not sure if we'll have that information on hand directly.
Oh, yeah, I'll go to Alison.
I'll need to look into the detail, Denise, and we'll come back to you. I don't have it to hand just now.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, but apart from that, yeah, it looks great. And obviously I was going to volunteer to be involved, but I've already been voluntold.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Portfolio
Yeah.
voluntold, yes. But you know, your
Yeah.
level of expertise and care.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
you know, I
No,
know that
that's
you'll
great.
put great thought into that.
Great, thank you.
I think what Denise is asking is in the reports on the individual halls that it doesn't have any rates, income or outgoings in there. So if we can just follow up and get back to us on that, thank you. Tracy.
With respect to the different hall meetings, so there's 5. If it's not something you're already going to do, may I suggest that you circulate a history of the hall? I think it's particularly important where things were in the ownership of the community, then they came to council, and then council might be saying we're taking it away or whatever. But I think that that's a key part of connecting with the people you're going to talk to show that you do understand that part of it. And I mean this in the best possible way. I think we have to also be really careful about how many staff we take, because there is a perception growing, certainly from feedback I'm getting, that at some of our events we have a large number of staff members, and I get that it's across different portfolios, but what people see is a lot of staff at a small meeting. So I'm passing that on to you to do with as you see fit.
Thanks, Tracy. Actually, John held a meeting out at Springfield, and we had Hannah and Catherine come along, and it was really good, and they did a great job, and you know, so that was almost quite a good practice run for this engagement. Samuel.
Morning. Can we include the outlay and investment in the more utilised tools in these calculations, as this would probably show, maybe, that some of our smaller rural halls are actually more profitable and return a higher ROI from the original outlay? And in regards to Ngāi Tahu's right of first refusal, is there any requirement for them to keep the section or hall as a space for community or not?
Sorry, so just want to make sure I've understood your question. So are you asking at a decision point, is there a requirement for a hall to remain open for a community? Is that what you're asking?
If Ngāi Tahu were to utilise their first right of refusal on acquiring that hall, if we were to...
So any decision is a decision of council. So that's not a staff decision. All we've done is we've just provided you with the background information of what would be required. So yeah, I'll hand to yourself.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. If a decision was made by council to divest a hall and it has to go through the reserves process, and if Ngāi Tahu wanted to exercise their first right of refusal, no.
And another point, please put some weight to the fact that it might sort of seem in the report as $1 and cent, and that these are just iron, bricks and mortar, but there's a huge amount of weight that needs to be put on that these are the hubs for a lot of our rural communities, and a lot of history, as brought up by Councillor McLeod. They're more than just iron, bricks and mortar. Thank you.
I think, my engagement with Hannah has been really great, and my view is that you have that on board for our communities, and it is community first engagement, which we know is really important because, these are part of our halls, and, my view is that we're trying to find better ways for our halls to be utilised, but that is alongside our community. So actually going out to a community and asking them, that is my view of this consultation. Aaron.
Thanks. I'm going to drill down to a couple of little technical comments, one of which I've already emailed Denise the details of, so I won't go into it too much, but the measures of success, I think we need to look at them a bit better, because simply holding a meeting with the people is not a measure of success. That's just saying it happened, how well it went, and what the outcomes of that. That's what we want to be able to look back on and see that it did go well or didn't, or where we can improve. In the tables of risks, the one about data integrity, it's
March 25th, 2026, Councillor briefing. Council briefing, March 25th.
I'm just pausing for a strange happening in the room for those online.
As you were, big red shout today, I think.
The risks, data integrity, the data integrity one is actually, from my reading, a bit more about repeating the earlier one about incomplete or inaccurate data. Data integrity is about the robustness, the accuracy and reliability of the data. So for an example, I know that last year or a year before, we mixed in some survey results from primary school children in our analysis. That would be an example of where the data integrity has been compromised. So just mitigate those risks rather than looking at how complete or accurate it is, would be my message. Internal communications. There isn't a specific mention of progress reporting to the council. I know you'll have councillors involved and they'll keep us up to date, but factoring in just keeping us abreast of, it doesn't need to be really in depth and, labouring things, but just we want to, collectively, we want to know how things are going. The questions. Second question, what has prevented you from using the hall more? It seems quite innocent, but in some contexts that might be seen as quite a little bit confrontational. If you've said, if they've answered the question, how often did you go to the hall, and they said, I go there once a month for the community meeting, and the next follow-up question is, why didn't you go more? They might feel a bit affronted, so I think maybe find a little bit more neutral language to try and tease out that information. And just to comment on page 97, there's please explain why you think that is the best option, but you've asked for 2 options, so you need to tweak the wording there. And thank you very much. I look forward to hearing how it goes.
Cool. I think, that'll be something that yourself and councillors will work on and refining that information that is going there. Sophie.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. I'm really interested to see how this goes. I just kind of had a bit of a suggestion more than anything else around the question around what options do you think council should consider for the future of the hall, and just thinking that you've probably already got this, but kind of like almost as a story, like, okay, if it's in community ownership, these are the things that you would look after, this is what we anticipate you would be required to take into account and stuff like that, because it's actually a really great idea, but it's something that you might want to go into informed. And I don't know whether you do that right at the first level, because it can be quite confrontational to go, okay, well, this is what you're signing up for. It might be sort of a bit further down the track, but just kind of teasing out whether what people think they would get out of a particular option is actually the reality. So that wasn't a question, that was just a comment, really. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Yep. No, it's good to see that we're moving forward. Just the rationale for including the 5 halls that you did, briefly.
So in terms of the reason we chose those 5 halls, so as part of the preparation for this project, we did quite an in-depth research project. So we looked at information that council already holds, as well as information that is outside of council about those halls. In terms of those 5, the reason we chose those 5 is because they had some pretty clear pathways that potentially could open up conversations. So for instance, Greendale Hall, we know that a community group has reached out to council in the past and said we're interested in potentially taking over ownership and running this hall. So I think that was a conversation that they had with yourself, Mayor Lydia. So in terms of that, we know that that is a discussion point that we can start with.
Yep. And 3.4b, just a little bit of explanation, please, about residents of the closest main town. I know you're going to focus on the immediate communities of interest, but when you go to the next main town, are you not getting a little bit removed from the immediate communities of interest? Because I know it's illustrative, but Darfield probably happens to be the closest main town to both Greendale and Sheffield, and probably Tawera as well. So just a little clarity as to why the emphasis on the closest main town.
Yeah, so the intention, if we look at engagement as almost like a circle, if you can imagine it in your head, so there's engagement which is targeted, and that's our primary audience, which is in the middle, and those are the people who are our stakeholders and also the people who live within the town. So they're the ones who have the most immediate impact. And then outside of that, you've got the people who are in the closest main town, so that would be Darfield. So those people may have an interest, and the reason why we're putting them there is we think that these people will probably have an interest, and we want to give them the opportunity to share their thoughts, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the engagement is going to be as targeted as that first one. And then at the last, you've got the periphery, which is your wider public, which would come through in the likes of a consultation or a public survey.
And I'd just add to that, in terms of that broader, that there are some examples where there's a church group located somewhere on the periphery of a township that has on occasion used it and would be interested in using it more. There is also some examples of small businesses, and I'm thinking of a particular ballet school which isn't literally in that, the person doesn't literally live in that town, but would be interested potentially in setting up a ballet studio and making some spaces available for the community, that sort of thing. So wanting to cast the net slightly wider for those that may have interests in better serving that community, but haven't necessarily had the opportunity.
So that probably leads into the next one, 3.4c, that if you're trying to get that balance, given the fact that Tawera, Melbourne is fairly rural, is 5 kilometres maybe a little bit fine?
So we're happy to take your guidance around that. Again, in terms of that, you councillors, I should say, sorry, not guys, councillors, you know your communities best, and if 5 kilometres is too small, then we're happy to make it broader. That's just an indication around a geographic area for an idea.
And finally, I know that several other people have commented on the questionnaire and it's indicative at this stage, but has any testing been done to with the community to get some feedback?
So no, there's no testing at this stage. So this is, it's, you may see it's still in draft, so there's opportunity to amend. So it's been going through different people, like yourself, John, had a review of it earlier this year. So in terms of that, we haven't done any specific testing, but in terms of moving forward, that's definitely something we can incorporate.
So there'd be the possibility of organising 1 or 2 small focus groups and just fine-tuning it?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Sorry, round 2. Is there any legal restrictions for the change of ownership as what we've seen that's occurred with the Sheffield poll? And if there is, are we able to identify that before we go out to the communities?
So yes, so each of the halls has its own specific nature of change. So if we were going to be going out or making some kind of decision about a facility, then those legal things would have to be considered. We have put things that we're aware of in the current state reports, which we attached to the paper today. The difficulty is, so in terms of these halls, a lot of them have been around a lot longer than any of us have. Many of them were built in the early 1900s, so records aren't necessarily perfect. And so some of them they're a little bit grey in terms of what we know. Part of this engagement process will actually be having conversations with communities to ask them what they know about the community hall, because a lot of them will have more knowledge than we do. I know that at the meeting that John facilitated in Springfield, there was a lady who came along and she had a box of photographs in her boot, which we don't have. Council only holds those kind of core records, so that's going to be part of the informing phase of this engagement. But yes, in terms of the engagement itself, we intend to be fully transparent with all of the information that we hold with the community to help them inform their options, but equally we're expecting the community to be transparent with us and saying, actually, this is what I know, that will help inform the story.
Great. In terms of money, because it's the one thing that we always get asked, are we going to go out with some options in terms of how money will be, either their rates bills will be reduced or a portion of their rates will be enabled to be spent on that building if they take ownership or care of it? Those are the things that we get asked regularly. So I'm just saying, is that stuff we're going to have at the outset or we're going to work on during the engagement process?
So that's not something that we can decide as staff. That's a decision for council to make, and it's not something that we would be able to provide.
But I guess going back to your earlier point, Councillor Munt, around describing some examples and how that is funded or resourced and the cost benefit around that. That is, as if we can draw some of that information, we'd definitely like to be part of the workshops, because it helps people think outside of what might be their particular view. They might see other options that have some interest to them.
Fantastic. Last one. If the public see that this has come out available, but they have another hall in mind that they would like council to give back to the community for whatever reason, if it's just to run or to have the key or to take the bookings, is there an opportunity for the public to bring forward other halls at this stage, or will that need to be at a later date?
So in terms of the project that we've got, the council have endorsed and approved staff to go ahead with 13 halls. We are starting with 5, and the further 8 will happen after the long-term plan. If the hall is within that 13, then yes, we've got approval from you as councillors to do that work. However, if it was a hall outside of that 13, then that would need to be a decision of council to pursue that. We're very open to those conversations, but in terms of a decision to actually progress that, that's a decision that council needs to make.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, team. I just a couple of things I've picked up, and I just wonder, Denise, whether we share that report of how we got to the 13, and just for some clarity for everybody, and it might help just inform the way forward as well, as we follow up there. And the one thing I picked up on is MCB being involved in the Melbourne halls, so making sure that they are part of this as well with our engagement. And if you want to know the history of all the Melbourne halls, I've got a book. It's called In the Shadow of the Alps, and it's very informative of the history, how they were built and by who, and what happened. So happy to lend it to you if you need some nighttime reading in that space. But thank you very much. I look forward to the further work that you're doing with the community and the councillors joining you on that as well. So thanks, team. Much appreciated. Councillors, that takes us to the end of public briefing. I might just give 5 minutes, let everyone set up and be back here. Cool. So, type 5.